Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, cutbacks are coming to San Diego courts, and a military appeals court will hear the case of a Camp Pendleton Marine convicted of murdering an Iraqi man. Don't try this at home. A serious warning from fire officials, and they really mean it. It could land you in some serious trouble.
And the Homeowners Bill of Rights passed the California legislature on Monday. What it means to San Diego homeowners and the penalties banks face if they don't comply. Plus, a major trade agreement between the U.S. and Pacific Rim countries is quietly being negotiated in San Diego. I'll have the details and the pushback on tonight's roundtable.
Also tonight, what a squirrel's tail can teach scientists about rattlesnakes. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dwayne Brown. 2 months from today, major cuts will take effect in the San Diego Superior Courts, eliminating about 250 jobs. 6 downtown criminal courtrooms will be closed on September 3rd, along with a civil courtroom. The Ramona Courthouse will also close, and so will courtrooms handling juvenile dependency and probate in Vista. Also beginning September 3rd, Superior Court business offices will close at noon on Fridays. The changes are designed to close a $14 million budget deficit. A state appeals court says cities cannot simply ban medical marijuana dispensaries. The court was ruling on a ban imposed by Los Angeles County. The justices say state law preempts county ordinances. Advocates for medical marijuana say it's a landmark decision that could impact a case pending before the state Supreme Court. In San Diego, dispensaries are not actually banned, but they are subject to zoning restrictions. The military's highest court will hear a new appeal from the leader of the Camp Pendleton 8. Marine Sergeant Lawrence Hutchins was sentenced to 11 years after his squad killed an unarmed Iraqi man in 2006. He was freed once after winning an appeal, then sent back to the brig at MCAS Miramar. Hutchins says the Navy secretary interfered in his case. He also claims his rights were violated when he was held in solitary confinement without access to a lawyer for a week. The Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces is expected to hear the case this fall. 45 large wildfires continue to burn across the U.S. tonight. C-130 cargo planes are now back in service to fight the fires. They were grounded after a deadly crash in South Dakota on Sunday. It killed 4 crew members, and the cause of the crash is under investigation. There will be more about the wildfires and extreme heat across the country coming up on the PBS NewsHour at 7 o'clock. Beware 4th of July revelers. Without a permit, it's illegal to have so much as a sparkler in San Diego County. That includes homemade bottle bombs fashioned from plastic soda bottles.
So you can see with the water spray and the splash, plastic frag can go every different direction
and cause serious harm. Captain Rob Sherman has been with the San Diego Bomb Squad 14 years. He says they respond to more than 50 bottle or acid bomb incidents a year.
Generally, it's adolescent or juveniles making them, just curious. Sometimes it's malicious intent.
Captain Sherman says these types of explosions happen in cycles.
So it's usually either the same group doing it or science experiments, and then it moves to a different area.
He's even seen people who innocently collect plastic get hurt by what's left of these acid bombs.
So this person just happened, it had function, just happened to pick up plastic for recycling purposes and you know, suffered the effects of a caustic substance, which this device was made from.
To possess, sell, or purchase fireworks in San Diego County, you have to be a professional, such as those who put on displays for cities or amusement parks. Many people think bottle rockets are harmless until it lands and sparks a fire. That's why all consumer fireworks are illegal, including sparklers. The county sheriff's bomb squad disposed of 100 pounds of illegal fireworks in 2010, and emergency rooms treated 8,600 fireworks-related injuries.
The number one thing is it's dangerous, and second thing is illegal.
Now, the best advice for those who want to see fireworks is to go to a public event in your community. For a list, go to our website, kpbs.org. The price at the gas pump keeps falling. The average for a gallon of regular is now $3.71, the lowest price since early January. AAA says demand is lower because of a slowdown in the global economy. Governor Jerry Brown wants more time to work with lawmakers on pension reform. He's proposed several changes, including 401k plans for new employees. Along with some guaranteed benefits, Brown also wants to raise the retirement age for state employees who don't work in public safety. It would go from 55 to 67. And local and state government workers would have to pay more toward their retirements. Democratic leaders sent the governor their own proposal over the weekend. It hasn't been made public, but Brown's office says the differences are too complex to work out before the legislative recess begins at the end of this week. California's largest state workers union has agreed to furloughs, cutting employee pay by roughly 5% for a year. Workers will get 12 unpaid days with some flexibility to schedule their time off. It's a compromise with Governor Brown. He originally wanted to move the state to a 4-day work week. An estimated 50,000 homeowners in San Diego County are at risk of losing their homes. State lawmakers approved a bill this week to help homeowners avoid foreclosure. Peggy Pico is looking into some of the key points of the measure over at the roundtable.
The Homeowners Bill of Rights passed the California legislature on Monday. Homeowner advocates claim it as a victory and say it's a blow to big banks. Governor Brown says he'll sign the legislation, but the skeptic in me wonders how much will this bill actually help the 50,000 or so San Diego homeowners that are in trouble. To help answer that question is my guest, David Lagstein, director of San Diego's Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, or ACE. And David, thanks so much for being here. I wanted to know if you could just give us a brief, big picture of how this Bill of Rights relates to the settlement that was recently happened in California. 5 banks, $18 billion to California homeowners. How does that relate?
The settlement was a multi-state settlement, which was one under the leadership of Attorney General Harris, and part of it had some best practices that banks would be required. And what this does is it locks in these requirements at the state level and has stronger enforcement when banks don't follow them.
Yeah, so kind of putting a little enforcement hook into that. So as far as the nuts and bolts of this Bill of Rights, because it seems like it's pretty intensive, what are a few of the key provisions? And I'm wanting to start with that dual tracking, if you could explain that.
Sure. Dual tracking is really an insidious practice of banks, where there's 2 parts of the bank. One part of the bank is supposedly negotiating a modification with a homeowner, asking for paperwork. The other side of the bank is actually moving a foreclosure at the same time. What this stops the bank, if you're negotiating a modification, you can't foreclose at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like they're kind of using it both ways to their benefits with that one.
That's exactly right. And we've seen many cases where the foreclosure notice arrives in the mail one day and then a modification offer arrives 2 days later. It's not fair.
Yeah, and a lot of people have mentioned that. Or they've even foreclosed and then they get modification notices afterwards, which could be unnerving.
That's exactly right.
There's also a really big one, and this I know personally because I'm trying to buy a home. The one person of contact. Explain what that is.
This actually provides a single point of contact for a homeowner that's trying to negotiate a modification. And as you yourself and almost anybody has dealt with a bank, you get a different person every single time. Lost paperwork is absolutely an epidemic, and this is actually about creating some sanity for the borrower so they can have a coherent path to try and negotiate a modification or renegotiate their loan.
And there's some financial penalties to the banks, right, if they do not comply with these rules, including a $7,500 penalty for verifying loan documentation appropriately, as in what comes to mind is that robo-signing, that computer signing. Does it apply to robo-signing, and what else does it apply to?
No, absolutely. This is about robo-signing. There's a number of different ways where loans have been filed inappropriately, the signatures weren't done properly, and this actually has some penalty for it. And importantly, for any violation of the law, it gives the borrower the opportunity to go to court and sue their bank, which is what gives the borrower leverage. The banks have unfortunately proven many times in the past, if there's not a penalty or consequences for their behavior, they're going to keep doing the same thing. This actually gives the borrower some leverage to make the banks do right by the borrower.
Right. Is $7,500 enough of a penalty?
You know, there's arguments that it should be more, but ultimately what this is about, this bill is not going to prevent every single foreclosure, but what it will provide is due process and fair treatment for homeowners that are trying to do the right thing and want to negotiate a modification to stay in their home.
Okay, I want to move quickly to the opponents of the Bill of Rights that say that, you know, foreclosure is inevitable. And we know that. It's market values, things like this. Isn't this just delaying and dragging out the process, making it more painful for those people who are already going through foreclosure?
I have to say that that argument confuses me, because why is treating a borrower fairly seen as dragging out the process? This is a bit, again, as I said, this is not about saving every foreclosure, but a person should be able to call up the bank, send documents, request a modification. The answer is not always going to be yes, but should have a clean and straightforward process, and that's what this is all about.
And we only have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to get to that this is a significant piece of legislation. If the governor signs this, we'll be the first state that has this kind of provision. Why is it so significant?
It's significant. This really was David versus Goliath. The bank spent a ton of money to lobby legislators. This was a true grassroots effort from people around the state. And because it's a victory, it looks like it's going to be a model for legislation around the country to protect homeowners. Legislators had to decide, were they on the side of Wall Street banks or were they on the side of homeowners, and this is an election year, and they did the right thing by homeowners, and we're really proud to play a part in this victory.
And I have to say, is this the end of the story? Is there? It seems like there's a lot.
There's a lot more work to be done. We're out of time, but principal reduction for homeowners stabilizes the housing market and will fix the economy, and that's a longer conversation, but that's the next step in the process. This is dealing with foreclosures that are in the pipeline, but it doesn't solve the bigger issue, and principal reduction is a cornerstone of that solution.
Maybe makes the path a little bit easier. Time will tell. David Lagstein, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Barrio Logan's Chicano Park is getting a $1 million upgrade thanks to a state grant. The improvements include new lighting, a skateboard area, and new playground equipment. The grant comes from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. The first over-the-counter HIV test was approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The Aura Quick test uses a mouth swab. It gives results in 20 to 40 minutes. The government estimates more than 1 million people carry HIV in this country, but a fifth of them don't know they have it. The FDA says the test is designed for people who might not otherwise get tested. It's expected to be on the market in October. A major trade conference is going on in San Diego right now. It involves the U.S. and other nations on the Pacific Rim. Their talk about a trade agreement has drawn protests from activists and labor unions. Peggy Pico has that story at the roundtable.
I'm pretty sure not many of you in San Diego have ever heard of the TransPacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement until this week. Has it been a secret? Some members of Congress think so. The 13th in a series of trade negotiations is going on right now at the Bayfront Hilton in San Diego amid protests from labor and the Occupy movement. To shed some light on what the negotiators and protesters want is Carol Guthrie, Assistant U.S. Trade Representative, and Celeste Drake, a policy expert with the AFL-CIO. Thank you both for joining me here today. And Carol, I have the first question for you. Can you briefly tell us what these negotiations are and how they came about?
Absolutely. In the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the U.S. is working with currently 8 other countries in the Asia-Pacific area to create a new trade agreement that will ultimately give the United States and our exporters more access to the really dynamic and growing markets of the Asia-Pacific, so we can follow the president's dictum to make more here, sell more there, and support more jobs here in the United States. And we are very glad to be here in San Diego this week and glad to have had folks from the labor movement, from Occupy, not only outside the hotel but inside the hotel for our stakeholder engagement this week, so that we can talk a little more about what's going on, so more people can learn about the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah, it sounds a little mysterious. And when you say trade, you know, big trade, you think of NAFTA, you think of these big trade agreements. It kind of scares a lot of people. So my question for you, Celeste, would be, are there protections for the U.S., as far as you know, going on during these negotiations for labor?
We know that the U.S. government has proposed some protections for workers, some protections for the environment. Part of the problem with this particular agreement is that with 9 nations, it's not just the U.S. and one other country trying to work it out, but it could be countries that have very serious concerns about having high labor standards, like Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, fighting back and not accepting the U.S. proposal. And these really matter, because if there are not labor protections for workers in these countries, it's not just low wages that lure factories offshore, but it's the fact that workers are repressed, can't form a union, can't bargain, things like that.
Is that what a lot of the protesters are out there for right now?
They're talking about jobs. They're talking about human rights and labor rights. They're talking about environmental protections. They're talking about trade rules that will work for working people and not just for the multinational corporations.
So it's not a blanket, no, we don't want this. It's more of a trying to find out the details of it. And that brings me back to you, Carol. Why is it important to improve Pacific Rim relationships? Why is this needed? Because it seems like, you know, we trade with Japan and China, and why is this needed?
We do trade with Japan and with China and with other nations in the Asia Pacific, but we can trade more and we can trade better. One of the things President Obama said when he first came into office was that we needed to do trade policy differently. For a long time, there were a lot of people who were shut out of the trade conversation in the United States. And we came in saying that we wanted trade policy that was more responsible and more responsive to Americans' concerns. And that's why we're really excited about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because we've said this needs to be a high-standard 21st century agreement that tackles old problems in new ways and tackles problems that haven't been tackled before in trade agreements. And that's why we're insisting on high standards on labor and on the environment. And there is no country in the Trans-Pacific Partnership that will be allowed to have a lower set of commitments on labor, on the environment, on any other issue. Everybody has to meet the high standards. That's what we're insisting on, and that's what all the partners have committed to do. We've made clear that we will not support an outcome in this negotiation that doesn't put the rights of workers on the same footing as commercial interests.
Well, I want to ask, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to ask each of you this, and first I'll start with you, Celeste. The North American Free Trade Agreement, that's when people talk about these trade agreements, that's what comes to mind. How do you view it? Do you view it as a success or a failure?
It's a failure. It's a failure for American workers. It's a failure for workers in Mexico and Canada. America's lost 700,000 jobs due to NAFTA, and our working partners in Mexico report more union repression, wage stagnation, peasants pushed off the land due to cheap U.S. agricultural imports. They view it as bad, and TPP is our chance to fix it, and if we don't fix it, it will be NAFTA 2, the revenge.
So it might help, and that's one side of it. Of course, Carol, what's your take on it?
Well, there's really good news for people who have these concerns, because recently Canada and Mexico have both been invited to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we feel that this is an opportunity to act on President Obama's promise to build on what was in NAFTA and make things work better for American workers and for everyone involved. So we're excited about the opportunities to make improvements and to really address some concerns that we've been hearing for a long time.
All right. Carol Guthrie, Celeste Drake, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
The most enduring relationship in nature is between predator and prey, and a San Diego State scientist is looking at how evolution has changed the way one pair of antagonists coexist. KPBS reporter Tom Fudge says his team is getting help from a robot.
In California, the ground squirrel is natural prey for the rattlesnake. So why in the world would this squirrel approach this rattler and get face-to-face with it?
This is the typical display. They'll approach, get fairly close, and do this tail flag while they kind of inspect the snake.
Rulon Clark is a professor of biology at San Diego State. He's a snake guy, and this summer he's in Northern California studying the way rattlesnakes and ground squirrels play the game of survival.
This California ground squirrel rattlesnake thing is just such a great kind of almost epic story.
But before we get too far into that epic, let's learn why squirrels wave their tails at snakes. Clark says a rattlesnake is like a gun with one bullet. When it strikes, it gives itself away and loses its coiled launching pad. And if it misses the prey gets away.
It all has to do with the snakes relying completely on crypsis and ambush. If the animals around that area are on the lookout for snakes, the odds of a snake being successful, very low.
So the squirrel flags its tail, even raising the temperature of its tail to send infrared signals to the rattlesnake.
So the tail flag seems to be a way for the squirrels to say to the snake, I'm ready to jump away. You know, sometimes the squirrel doesn't even know the snake is there for sure, but it's still tail flagging.
This body language seems to make the snake withhold its strike. But how do you create a reliable way to test the theory? Meet robo-squirrel.
This is what we hope the robo-squirrel kind of looks like from the snake's perspective.
The creation of a UC Davis engineer, robo-squirrel is a taxidermied squirrel with a mechanical tail that mimics the tail flagging movement. In this video, we see it meeting a rattlesnake. When robo-squirrel flags his tail, the snake does not strike. But when it remains still, the snake strikes. To its great disappointment, I'm sure. Just another robo-squirrel. Now let's get back to that epic story Rulon Clark was talking about. The story is evolution, or to be specific, coevolution.
Coevolution is just, it's evolution, but it's specifically evolution between two parties that are continually adapting to each other. You can have like mutualistic coevolution between, say, plants and their pollinators, where they benefit each other. Then you can have antagonistic coevolution, also a very powerful force. Two parties that are at odds, like host-parasite or pathogen, human.
Or ground squirrel rattlesnake, fighting the battle of predation over thousands of generations, making each other genetically stronger and more cunning.
Now, Clark's research is purely scientific, but could have practical applications. Coevolution has made ground squirrels quite resistant to snake venom. Studying the squirrel's genetics might lead to snake bite treatments for humans.
In light of tomorrow's 4th of July holiday, tonight on our public square, a bit about beer, specifically San Diego's booming craft beer industry and the role Mayor Jerry Sanders plays in supporting it. KPBS Metro reporter Katie Orr will have the full story on the mayor's role in the local beer industry on Evening Edition tomorrow night. But first, I've got a lighthearted question for you. Which mayoral candidate, Bob Filner or Carl DeMaio, do you think would be the better choice for carrying on Sanders' tradition, celebrating the local craft beer industry? Let us know what you think by following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and just email us at publicsquare@kpbs.org.
Recapping tonight's top stories, major cuts will take effect in the San Diego Superior Courts in 2 months. Effective September 3rd, 6 downtown criminal courtrooms will be closed, along with a civil courtroom. The Ramona Courthouse will also close, and so will courtrooms handling juvenile dependency and probate in Vista. Also beginning September 3rd, the Superior Court's business offices will close at noon on Fridays. Court officials are making the changes to close a $14 million budget deficit. About 250 jobs will be eliminated. A state appeals court says cities cannot simply ban medical marijuana dispensaries. The court was ruling on a ban imposed by Los Angeles County. The justices say state law preempts county ordinances. Advocates for medical marijuana say it's a landmark decision that could impact a case pending before the state Supreme Court. In San Diego, dispensaries are not actually banned, but they are subject to zoning restrictions. The military's highest court will hear a new appeal from the leader of the Camp Pendleton 8. Marine Sergeant Lawrence Hutchins was sentenced to 11 years for leading a squad that killed an Iraqi man in 2006. He was freed once after winning an appeal, then sent back to the brig at MCAS Miramar. Hutchins says the Navy secretary has interfered in his case. He also says his rights were violated when he was held in solitary confinement without access to a lawyer for a week. The Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces is expected to hear the case in the fall. 45 large wildfires continue to burn across the U.S. tonight. C-130 cargo planes are now back in service to fight the fires. They had been grounded after a deadly crash in South Dakota on Sunday. It killed 4 crew members and is still under investigation tonight. There will be more about the wildfires and extreme heat across the country coming up on the PBS NewsHour in just a moment. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. We've also got a list of tomorrow night's 4th of July fireworks displays all around the county. Remember, fireworks are illegal unless you have a permit. Thanks for joining us. The PBS NewsHour is next. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Have a great night and a wonderful 4th of July.